Hello again, it's the Patriotic Christian. Today, what I would like to do is answer a question of, is a constitution biblical? This is a little bit of an expansion on my last video where I explained the practical reasons why what a constitution is and why we should have one. But today it's going to be a little bit more of the Bible study type in that I'm going to be explaining using biblical sources why a constitution is something that we should have. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by reading a verse. Actually, I'll give a little bit of background. I don't have time to do too deep of a study in a video, but if you're familiar with the story of Israel in general and how they went from the time of Moses all the way until the time of the first king, King Saul, they actually operated without a king. And that was very unusual for the time, and indeed is sort of unusual today. As you know, most countries, they don't call their leader a king, but in a great many countries around the world, they operate very much like that. So anyway, in this story, you had a time when Israel did not have a king, and a time when they actually started to want a king. And I'm going to start here with 1 Samuel chapter 10, verse 25, because I think this is important. Then Samuel told the people the manner of the kingdom, and wrote it in a book, and laid it up before the Lord. And Samuel sent all the people away, every man to his house. Now, the reason I think that's important is because it records that Samuel wrote in a book the manner of the kingdom, which indicates that this was not, an unlimited power being given to the king. The king had rules to follow as well. And this comes from previous history. So I'm going to go to Deuteronomy 17 and show you why Samuel would ever do such a thing. So Deuteronomy 17, starting in verse 14 all the way through 20. Now this is when God is giving law to the children of Israel. And anyway, so here it goes. When thou art come into the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee, and shalt possess it, and shalt dwell therein, and shalt say, I will set a king over me, like as all the nations that are about me. Thou shalt in any wise set him a king over thee, whom the Lord thy God shall choose. One from among thy brethren shalt thou set king over thee. Thou mayest not set a stranger over thee, which is not thy brother. But he shall not multiply horses to himself, nor cause the people to return to Egypt, to the end that he should multiply horses. For as much as the Lord hath said unto you, ye shall henceforth return no more that way. Neither shall he multiply wives unto himself, that his heart turn not away. Neither shall he greatly multiply to himself silver and gold. And it shall be, when he sitteth upon the throne of his kingdom, that he shall write him a copy of this law in a book out of that which is before the priests, the Levites. And it shall be with him, and he shall read therein all the days of his life, that he may learn to fear the Lord his God, to keep all the words of this law and these statutes to do them, that his heart be not lifted up above his brethren, and that he turn not aside from the commandment to the right hand or to the left, to the end that he may prolong his days in his kingdom, he and his children in the midst of Israel. Now, I find this very informative and interesting because at this time, God did not establish a kingdom for Israel. And, I don't have time to go into all the different references, but if you study it out yourself, you'll find that the system that God ordained in the nation of Israel, the only nation that God ever actually established and organized himself, He did not give them a king. He did not give them a kingdom. They were divided into, depending on how you do the math, either 12 or 13 tribes. And each tribe governed itself, autonomously. But they also had times when they would gather together and like assemble, usually elders. So these are representatives from each tribe that would come and make decisions. Sometimes they would appoint a judge, or, all throughout the book of Judges, for example, you have judges that were, judges over all of Israel, or sometimes just parts of Israel. But these were not kings. They did not have the power of a king. They served very much like we might think of a president. He's not there for life. His children don't inherit it after him. It's temporary, and it's only for specific things. Usually in times of war is when a judge would become necessary. And so I would liken a judge in the Bible a lot closer to what we would consider today to be a president. And the elders that would come and represent each tribe would be a lot like senators or congressmen. So yeah, and each tribe would sort of be much like a state in the United States. So yeah, the fact is, our founding fathers in America actually modeled the American system of government, not only in having a constitution, establishing the rules out, but they also structured it to resemble what God actually instituted. And this is part of why America's system of government has been so much more successful than most others, is it's actually modeled after God's model. And this is why I would definitely make the case that the Constitution, the idea of a Constitution, is biblical, and even more specifically, the United States Constitution is biblical, because it actually uses the system that God established, for the most part anyway. I mean, obviously men were involved and they didn't follow it exactly. And to be fair, the Bible doesn't, it's not an instruction book for government per se, but it does have instructions for government. And so they had to draw what they could and sort of, use their best judgment on the rest. And so of course it's not going to be exactly like it was in the Bible. And I don't think it has to be. Every country, just like I explained in the part about nations, that every nation can do things differently. They don't have to do it all the same way. And I believe that's how God wants it. Now, I'm also going to read this whole chapter here in 1 Samuel to make another point abundantly clear. So this is 1 Samuel chapter 8. And this is a little bit more of the history that I'm referring back to. So, and it came to pass when Samuel was old that he made his sons judges over Israel. Now the name of his firstborn was Joel, and the name of his second Abiah. They were judges in Beersheba. And his sons walked not in his ways, but turned aside after lucre, and took bribes, and perverted judgment. Then all the elders of Israel gathered themselves together, and came to Samuel unto Ramah, and said unto him, Behold, thou art old, and thy sons walk not in thy ways. Now make us a king to judge us like all the nations. But the thing displeased Samuel, when they said, Give us a king to judge us. And Samuel prayed unto the Lord, and the Lord said unto Samuel, Hearken unto the voice of the people in all that they say unto thee, for they have not rejected thee, but they have rejected me, that I should not reign over them. So I'm going to stop there for a minute and just kind of, emphasize this, that God is supposed to be our king. We're not supposed to have an earthly king, and this is what God is saying here. By asking for an earthly king, they're in a sense rejecting their heavenly king, the true king, because your loyalties can't be divided like that. You either serve one or you serve the other. And so this is what God is talking about. He's saying, I've provided a system of government for you that doesn't require a king, specifically because I am your king. And that's God's position on the matter. All right, continuing on. According to all the works which they have done since the day that I brought them up out of Egypt, even unto this day, wherewith they have forsaken me, and served other gods, so do they also unto me. Now therefore, hearken unto their voice, howbeit yet protest solemnly unto them, and show them the manner of the king that shall reign over them. And Samuel told all the words of the Lord unto the people that asked of him a king. And I think that's also worth stopping to take note. God tells Samuel, he's like, go ahead and do what they tell you. They asked for it. But protest to them. You know, don't like make it sound like they're asking for the right thing. Make it clear that they're making a mistake if they do this. Okay? All right, continuing on. And he said, this will be the manner of the king that shall reign over you. He will take your sons and appoint them for himself, for his chariots, and to be his horsemen, and some shall run before his chariots. And he will appoint him captains over thousands, and captains over fifties, and will set them to ear his ground, and to reap his harvest, and to make his instruments of war, and instruments of his chariots. And he will take your daughters to be confectionaries, and to be cooks, and to be bakers. And he will take your fields, and your vineyards, and your oliveyards, even the best of them, and give them to his servants. And he will take the tenth of your seed, and of your vineyards, and give to his officers, and to his servants. And he will take your men servants, and your maidservants, and your goodliest young men, and your asses, and put them to his work. He will take the tenth of your sheep, and ye shall be his servants. And ye shall cry out in that day because of your king, which ye shall have chosen, and the Lord will not hear you in that day. Nevertheless, the people refused to obey the voice of Samuel, and they said, Nay, but we will have a king over us, that we also may be like all the nations, and that our king may judge us, and go out before us, and fight our battles. And Samuel heard all the words of the people, and he rehearsed them in the ears of the Lord. And the Lord said to Samuel, Hearken unto their voice, and make them a king. And Samuel said unto the men of Israel, Go ye every man into his city. And so I think it's worth noting here in verse 20 that they says, the people are saying that we also may be like all the nations. So they wanted a king so that they could be like other countries, you know. It's simpler, it's easier. We don't have to actively participate in the government, you know. We can just let the king handle things. Okay, and that our king may judge us and go out before us and fight our battles. I think that's important to point out as well, because I'm sure I'll do a video on this in the future, but the original system that God designed was a very small government type system. They didn't even have a standing army. They relied on a militia. So the people would gather and form an army when they needed one. And when they didn't need one, they would disband the army and everyone goes back to their lives. And that's the system that our founding fathers intended for America. And because that's the system that God ordained. That's the ideal system for government and for an army in God's view. But this is what they're talking about when they say they want a king to fight our battles. See, now they can have a king with a standing army that when they get attacked, the people don't have to go to war themselves. They've got this other separate army that they can go and fight their battles for them. But of course, the drawback is it's costly. You know, it costs money to maintain that. And when you're not using it, it kind of seems like a waste of money sometimes. Anyway, so I wanted to also explain a little bit how this looks, the difference between a dictatorship, which most nations have some form of dictatorship. They would have like their king or emperor at the top, and he would either make law officially or sometimes just on their whim. They just kind of like, you know, tell people how they want it and make it happen. But this would be the basis for the government, and then the people would be subject to the government. So they're on the bottom in a dictatorship. Now, in a republic, the type that God set up, you have the people at the top. You know, because if God is the king, he's the king of each individual person, the people don't need a higher authority than God, right? So in order to take care of the day-to-day matters of government, though, the people would appoint representatives. and then these representatives would make law, and of course that would be put into action with government, and then of course, the government does govern the people, so it would circle back up to here. But at the end of the day, the people are at the top, and the government is the servant all the way at the bottom, and it goes through representatives and law. This is how a republic is set up, and this is how God set it up. You could even look at the entire Mosaic Law, if you like, as a constitution, because it has all kinds of rules for how to, organize the government, how to enforce laws, what laws must be enforced, and so on. And so if you do a study of this for yourself, just read through, especially the Old Testament, specifically Genesis through Judges would be a good way, and just kind of take a broader view of it. Instead of focusing on all the minute details, start thinking about the structure of it. Like, how is this organized, and what is it? What is it like? And I believe that God's ideal is to have government so small and so out of our lives that, when you look at the system that he established, they didn't even have prisons. In fact, they didn't even have executioners. I mean, whenever someone was worthy of death that had murdered someone, it was up to a relative of the victim to actually hunt them down and administer justice. This is how small of a government God originally wanted. And it's only mankind that corrupts it and thinks that, because it's difficult for us to sort of govern ourselves, it's easier for us to just give power to a government, and even a tyrannical dictatorship. It's easier for us because we think it sort of lessens our responsibility. And I don't believe that's the case. I believe God still holds us individually responsible for the kind of government we tolerate. So anyway, I hope this was helpful in explaining why the idea of a constitution is a biblical one. And more specifically, the United States Constitution actually drew a lot of inspiration from the Bible. And I hope the video was helpful. Maybe in the future I'll go more into depth if I have time and if that's what you guys want. Catch you later.